My name is Lenora Hansen. I'm one of the co-organizers. Basically, all the co-organizers will be up here at some point introducing panels. This is our second one for the day, entitled Mobilizing Precarity, Living and Laboring. I'll just say really briefly, we're really excited about this panel, in particular because of the way in which it's really trying to extend the conversation beyond academic contingency and precarity, and in thinking about different forms of precarity. So this is one reason that we have representatives who I'll introduce in just a second from Occupy Housing, Effective 15, and the Living Wage Campaign. Because if you read our opening statement, one of the first questions on that was, who are the subjects of precarity? And we mean that not as just an open question, but I think a challenge to ourselves in academia to think beyond just taking tactics and strategies from other kinds of movements, but really thinking about the way in which there's more than an analogy between our positions. Here there's a very real lived situation, and that we need to take that seriously. So that is the hope that, or our hope is that this panel will start to do some of that work. Of bringing not just conversations together, but really starting to think really deeply about that question of the subjects of precarity and ourselves as those subjects in a way that's not going away anytime soon, unless we do something about it. So anyway, I'll just introduce our panelists really quickly. As was mentioned by Andrew Yale at the beginning, Ty Moore unfortunately came down with a flu a few days ago, so Kat Slonick has been absolutely amazing and flying down as of this morning and coming in to take his place. I don't have a bio from you, Kat, so maybe you can say a few words later, but she's worked closely with Ty, both with the Occupy Homes campaign there and his recent close to successful bid for city council there as a socialist alternative candidate. And we also have Trish Kajla, who's a member of the Workers Organizing Committee of Chicago, the Effective 15 campaign, and is working towards her PhD in labor history at the University of Chicago. Over the course of 2013, she organized 5 one-day strikes with her co-workers, and her article, Beyond Fast Food Strikes, appeared in the Jacobin in October, and she is the author of a forthcoming article on the political economy of low-wage work, which will appear in the International Socialist Review later this year. And I just found out Trish just moved to Chicago a year and a half ago, so that's kind of makes it work to be viewing it every year and a half. And then we have Laura Goldblatt, who is also a co-organizer of the conference. She's a doctoral candidate in the English department at the University of Virginia, a member of UVA's Living Wage Campaign, and a founder of Who's University. She has an article forthcoming in Mississippi Quarterly, and has presented academic work at the Academic Studies Association, Modernist Studies Association, C19, and the American Literature Association conferences. She very infrequently tweets using the handle L. Goldblatt, and blogs even more infrequently on the website It's Always Sunny in the Americas. So let's let you guys take it away.
All right, yeah, so thank you so much, Lenora, for introducing me. My name is Kat Slonick, and I've been organizing with Occupy Homes since we formed it out of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And currently I'm playing a role as like the lead organizer, so I'm like forming the different campaigns and coordinating them. So if you have any questions about our theory of change or campaign strategy, I will not have time to get into that in 15 minutes. And I'd love to have more conversations about that, or you can bring it up in the Q&A. First off, I just want to thank Lenora and all the other coordinators for getting me down here and making sure Occupy Homes could be a part of this awesome conference. I think it's really, really important that students are involved in resistance work on the ground. From Tahrir Square to Madison to Occupy Wall Street, I don't know more, students have played an important role, and I want to see that continue, as the resistance definitely needs intellectuals and young people in leadership. So I'm here to talk about Occupy Homes Minnesota. We formed, basically I want to talk about how we formed, what we're aiming to win, and how we're going to win it. And just a little bit of our background. So I mentioned we came out of the Occupy Wall Street movement, arguably one of the most successful offshoots as we're still organizing. We've had some concrete victories. We formed by coming out of the public spaces and plaza occupations and going into the neighborhoods, right? And we started in some of the most directly affected neighborhoods by the economic crisis. So communities of color that are still suffering from the foreclosure crisis and losing homes, filled with vacant, blighted properties. And we moved into those areas because in 2011, people had just woken up. They were ready to challenge not just Republicans, but also Democrats, people who had not been politicized before. who were ready to come out of their homes and go into streets. And we thought we'd make the walk very easy for them by just bringing it into the neighborhoods, right? And so we believe that the economic collapse is not a result of homeowners who fail to pay their bills because they are stupid or lazy or something, but the result of a very intentional act on the part of Wall Street to bet against our communities after having staffed them up to fail. So after Wall Street ravaged my community in North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis, we decided to stand up and resist. But why housing, right? Like student debt is off the chain, homelessness isn't great, but there's a lot of other issues that matter, right? Why housing? Well, we were in a crisis moment. So many people were ready to be galvanized around losing their home, their neighbors losing their home, their property value being down, their mom and dad losing their house while they were away at college, things like this. So it's just a crisis moment. Another really important thing about housing is it draws upon the intersection of oppression so simply and so concretely. Communities of color in Minneapolis are 9 times as likely to receive a fraudulent loan, 6 times as likely if you're a single mom. I mean, it's obvious, the connection of these kinds of oppressions in housing. And what was also very cool about this crisis is that it brought the American identity, right? The American dream about a house and a picket fence or something, and pushing that into radicalism. Because I could go and knock on a door and say, hey, I'm Kat, I'm with Occupy Homes. You know, I think it'd be really fair if, you know, my neighbor Bobby Hull got Chase Banks to negotiate with him. And that my neighbor would be like, yeah, all right, cool. Like 2 years ago, you wouldn't sign that anti-war petition, but you believe that Chase Bank should negotiate with Bobby. Right on. And you can take that and say, and why is the police coming to his house to evict him on behalf of Wall Street when they gave him a fraudulent loan to begin with? So now you have a neighbor questioning the role of the police state in Wall Street. And then you take that and you're like, all right, we'll come to this barbecue, it's an eviction-free barbecue, it'll be cool, we'll have some stew, maybe some gumbo, whatever, and then you talk about community-controlled land and banks. And so you move someone from Chase Bank should negotiate with a homeowner, which is not a particularly radical demand or ask, to community-controlled land and banks. And so because it's so steeped in the American identity, because we're in this moment of crisis and talking about the intersection of these oppressions, people get radicalized really quickly. The other important thing about why housing is because it offers 2 kinds of victories. One is very tangible, right? A house. You can see it, you can go into it. If you win it, you know it. If you didn't win it, well, there's boards all over it and you're not getting in. The other kind of victory that we have is the intangible, changing the narrative around economic crisis, changing the narrative around homelessness, around foreclosure. And that's something that we've been successful at doing because of our ability to generate a lot of media and a lot of word of mouth around our work. So I want to talk a little bit about what are our concrete demands, like what are we actually trying to do? So we're trying to get the vacant homes in Minneapolis turned over to community control through a community land bank and a community-run nonprofit, so that nonprofit that would allow for democratic participation and membership. Well, the land can no longer be bought and sold because it would be under a community land trust. So that's numero uno. And then we are also arguing for principal reduction for all homeowners. So when the economic collapse happened, all the banks got these bailouts and they bought each other up and they were all, got fat and happy again. Meanwhile, we've all gotten used to the cinched belt. And so we're saying now's the time for our bailout, right? Give principal reduction to every single homeowner who is underwater right now. And so we are fighting for that in Minneapolis. We're also fighting for a moratorium on foreclosures, stop these foreclosures until we know that these fraudulent practices are made illegal and there are policies to stop the banks from doing this again. Our final argument is that no city resources should go towards eviction or foreclosures that are brought by these illegal, immoral practices of the banks. So how are we going to win these demands, right? Well, we've got to have a vision, and our vision is for a community where we have control of the land and the bank, and where the city resources are never used for Wall Street control. Basically, we're talking about cops not being able to be used as an eviction squad. So some of the tactics that we use are meant to be splashy and make a lot of news. And so things we've done is erect a giant tripod, like a 30-foot tripod with a person dangling from it in the middle of the bank to say, he's not coming down until we get a phone call from the president or the CEO of the bank. And those sort of tactics have worked. We've gotten results. We've got negotiations started that way. We've also done fun things like balloon banners, giant helium balloons, and like throwing a banner all the way up a fancy rotunda. It is surprising that they keep BB guns on hand. They get shot down quickly. We've also done really radical things like anti-eviction blockades using Earth First tactics, so the immobilization devices called sleeping dragons, where people lock their bodies down to the property to prevent themselves from being evicted by the sheriffs or the police, which gets a lot of media attention, it turns out, when your body is locked into a cement barrel, and is also very difficult to remove. And the fourth tactic that we have been getting really good at is home reclamation. So there are these vacant homes in our community, and there are also a lot of my friends and people in my community experiencing homelessness. There are 5 times more vacant homes in America than there are people experiencing homelessness. 5 times. That's insane. So we're taking those houses. We're no longer waiting for some due process or Habitat for Humanity or some other nonprofit to decide that they can invest their money in more homes. We're not waiting for the county. We are taking them, and people are moving in as an act of liberation, an act of resistance, and also for very practical reasons, because it's -50, and there are not enough houses for everyone until we liberate them. So I'm gonna tell a brief story about a woman that I met a year ago, actually, on the 7th of January, 2013. Her name is Jessica English. She came on this really cool bus tour that we organized called the Housing and Civil Rights Bus Tour, and we went all over the Twin Cities to like different faith groups and labor destinations, and we talked about housing resistance, and we also talked about civil rights within the Twin Cities. And there's this woman at the end. We had to speak out for people who were moved by the different stops. And so Jessica English stood up and she said, "I am homeless, and I have never had people say that that wasn't my fault. I have 4 kids that now have to stay with my ex-husband because I don't have a steady place for them to stay." And we spoke to her after, and we're like, "Jessica, we're starting this new crazy thing where we liberate houses. What do you think?" And she was like, that sounds amazing. You know, she had come from like the Democrat paradigm of like Obama type thing, and voted for him, and had campaigned for him, and even worked for him, and had been so disappointed. She worked at Target for more than full time, and these folks will talk about the struggle of Target workers and low-wage workers, but she just couldn't make ends meet. She couldn't pay rent and pay for her kids, and she ended up homeless, even though she fought for all these right, just things. And so, we're like, "Jessica, there's all these houses in South Minneapolis. Let's go canvass around them and see if the neighbors would be down to let you move in." And there's this house on 2nd Avenue, a couple blocks from where I live, that had been a flop house, a drug house. Folks had broken in and were using it for God knows what, and the neighbors were very sick of it and very excited that this young mother who was clean, who was going to move in and fix up the house, pay for the utilities, pay for the property taxes. It would no longer be a blight. And so we moved in, we tore up carpeting, threw in dead rats, it was awful, bagged up all the trash, and some union security guards were going on strike at Wells Fargo. And what's interesting is Wells Fargo owns this property, and we're like, oh wow, it's almost like low-wage workers and people experiencing homelessness could share this fight for housing at Wells Fargo. So we brought together all of our union brothers and sisters, some housing justice folks, people experiencing homelessness, immigrant rights folks, and marched from Jessica's house to Wells Fargo Home Mortgage, which happened to only be 8 blocks away. And we marched carrying giant trash bags full of dead rats, dirty carpet, just like nasty garbage. And we landed that stuff right on their doorstep. And we said, "Give us a house." And they have not yet given it to us overnight. But the VP who works there did come down and accept the position. We had an employee march off the job and come down and give an amazing speech about how effed up their mortgage department is. And Wells Fargo canceled the eviction process and foreclosure process on the house, so it's now called a zombie foreclosure. It's in limbo. And so Jessica luckily got on her feet, living here for a few months, and she used it as transitional housing, and now there are a few young men who are living here doing the same thing, getting on their feet, using it as transitional housing, figuring out cooperative living, doing, like that self-liberation stuff, while participating in resistance that is aimed towards actual system change. So, just to kind of sum it up, I believe that we will win. I believe that we are in this tidal pool, right? We're creating these structures so that when the tidal wave of the movement comes, we can push it as far as possible to spread over as much as possible. And I believe that we already know everything that we need to know to stand up and to actually win. That's what I've got.
Yeah, so I think that overlaps very well with what I'm going to talk about. So I am a member of the Fight for 15 here in Chicago. I work at Whole Foods. And I think just like people who have been foreclosed on, people who work low-wage jobs are portrayed as lazy, undereducated, unworthy of receiving higher wages. And so Fight for 15 campaign has actually come back. So it's not, it's also about really tangible things like wages and rights on the job and unionization. But it's also about saying that we are actual human beings and we deserve to be treated like human beings when we're at work. And I think another way that this really well overlaps with the question of housing is actually, for example, Shakita Moore, who was a worker at Jason's Deli. As she was being harassed on the job, sexually harassed by her manager, she was fired for standing up to racism on the job. And she was also having to live sleeping on the trains with her kids in Chicago, which is fortunate we have trains that you can actually sometimes catch a ride on to warm up, but in the winter like this, it's absolutely unbelievable that we live in a city where $4 billion every year come through the stores in this loop, and at the same time you have the people working there not able to meet the most basic demands that are required for living. So I want to talk also a little bit about how we began to organize and also connect this with my experience as a graduate student, because I think there's a lot of overlap that sometimes is overlooked. Sometimes it's a direct overlap in the sense that there are increasing numbers of not just graduate students but undergraduate students, academic workers in terms of adjunct professors who are actually also not just low-wage workers in academia, but also are having to work low-wage jobs outside academia. But it also has other connections in terms of the structure, how the work is being structured is actually quite similar, and the same things that have been used to drive down wages in fast food and retail are now being used in academia as well to drive down the real wages of academic workers. So for Fight for 15, we're a citywide union focused on all retail and service employee or fast food employees. So this means we have a very diverse, even though mostly you've probably seen McDonald's in the news, we're actually at over 70 stores in many national chains. So we have people from Whole Foods, Victoria's Secret, Macy's, Sears, Wendy's, Burger King, and you get the idea that there are also small places like Sally Beauty Supply, Subway. And what this has done is it has, in a way that maybe a traditional union campaign has not, for our kind of workers, it has really taught the meaning of cross-shop solidarity in a very real sense. Because even though every time we go on strike we're filing ULPs, unfair labor practices at our workplaces, we also are having the sense that we're striking together because we have more power together. So we file an unfair labor practice at Whole Foods and 10 of us go out on strike. That isn't really going to accomplish anything. But what we've actually been able to accomplish through citywide strikes has been to do something, intangible, to shift the entire narrative of minimum wages and needing to be raised. What do low-wage workers deserve? Has completely shifted in the past year. You only have to go back about 7 months when the majority of media coverage was completely negative, saying that we were selfish and greedy and that we would never win. And then you have now, we have had the Sawant campaign in Seattle, actually victorious with the main plank in her platform, among other things, because there are many important issues, being the $15 an hour minimum wage. You have voters voting for a $15 an hour minimum wage in SeaTac, raising the minimum wage to $10 in California, Obama saying now that he supports a 10-10 minimum wage. All of these things which would never have happened if workers across the country had not stood up together and actually done something that is both a workplace strike, but is also a political strike against a system that says workers are not valuable and corporate profits have to come first, regardless of anything else that happens. We're saying, no, workers actually do deserve a say in how we negotiate the terms of how we will be exploited by these companies. But that's what it is, though, right? We're saying, under the system, what they do is they exploit our labor, and we're saying we deserve a say in how that is going to happen. We deserve a say in how the work will be done, how much we will be paid, and how you will carry out your business practices. Because in some sense, we are the business practice, right? We actually put the company's policies into practice, and we have the power to stop them and shut them down. So I think another way that this, besides just the model of work, that it connects to academia, is the question of, they talk about stakeholders a lot, and I'm sure this is something we have all heard, in terms of we have a stake in the academy, we have, so therefore, we are somehow supposed to buy in to the idea that that the status quo is somehow working for us because we are a part of it. And so Whole Foods is an excellent example of this, because they actually legitimately say this in their core values, which we can be called up in front of the entire store to recite at any given point, that we are all stakeholders in the company, and therefore it is in our interest to ensure that the company is as profitable as possible by working as few hours as possible and being paid as low wages. They don't put that part in. But that's the idea, right? So that by making sure that you work as hard as you can for the whole 9 hours you're there, that you are making them as much money as you possibly can. And that this is somehow in your interest because it's your interest for the company to stay in business. When this is a model that only exists to drive down wages, make you work faster and harder for less pay, and give you less security on the job. And so what we've actually come back to say is that, and this has been helped along by what Occupy did in terms of making a 99% versus 1%, something that was very tangible to huge amounts of people, was to say that no, there is an us and a them, and that the us are all the workers together, the low-wage workers, people who are making less than $15 an hour, struggling to get by, workers who are still unionized and making more than us, but still being trod on by their bosses, like the machinists at Boeing, who just lost their pensions this week. And then the them is the people like the McDonald's CEO, who had the actual gall to say to one of my fellow union members, when she says she can't pay her bills or feed her kids, that while I've worked here for 40 years, and maybe nobody's worked here that long, after she's worked there for 10 years and only making $8.25 an hour, that she will then somehow magically make $2.5 million a year.
Yeah.
So, these people are making more in a couple of hours than we will make in an entire year. And so it's pretty clear to me that these are two different sides of something. We actually have very little stake in the same things happening. And if companies can't afford to pay a living wage, we should seriously consider whether that's a model we actually want into our economy. And so just like the idea of people having the right to stay in their homes starts, when you really start to think about it, challenges some very basic structures of how housing works in this country. You also see that when you start to challenge even most basic things like saying, first of all, that there should be a higher minimum wage and that workers actually deserve a say in how things are done. It begins to challenge the entire structure of how work is organized in this country, and to say that, the priorities of the system are not set up correctly. You have to begin to challenge the entire system. So in a more basic sense, I want to talk also a little bit about organizing and what organizing looks like, because I think, again, the models can be very much shared and we can learn a lot from each other in terms of, I know one thing we've really taken from some of the organizing I learned when I was working with Graduate Students United at U Chicago was just the importance of really getting to know your workplace and actually knowing the type of work that is done, whatever the department is. So for example, at Whole Foods, we have many departments. I work in customer service, so I do like checking out and this sort of thing. But so now, every time when I go into work, I go and I stop by all of the departments. I know what are the big issues in the meat department, and what are the issues in the specialty department, and the prep foods, even though I've never worked, I have no idea how to cook things, and, would probably die in a kitchen in about a day. But I know that when I go back there, I can talk to them and say, isn't it really messed up that they're now making you pay extra for special safety shoes? You can't get the covers anymore. They're taking that money out of your paycheck. And that's an issue I can use to connect with them. And we use this to build networks because what they do when they divide us by, whether it's department in a store or department in university, they say you're different kinds of specialties. You don't have to talk to each other. And what matters to you does not matter to anyone else. And we know that this is not the case. So for us as organizers, what we have to do is we have to actually reach across these lines and say that, yes, the workers and the butchers and the cashiers actually do have something in common in saying how the store can be run and how we can organize ourselves to actually leverage against the company in the same way that the history department and the physics department can work together in order to challenge the power of the university. So we started with these sit-down meetings. We do flyerings after work every day that we're there to meet people as they're coming out because everyone has very different schedules. It's the only time that people really come out all at one time. And we say to people, would you like to make more money? And it's very rare that people say no to that question, especially when you're making $10 an hour. And once you start that conversation, you can be like, well, what do you think it would take for you to get more money? And most people say, I have no idea. And then you say, well, what if we went and challenged the boss on this issue? And we said that, first of all, we don't want any more sexual harassment at work. It's a huge issue in retail work. And we also want a wage increase because of the emotional labor we do in making sure customers actually get a good experience at the store and, are able to stay sane in this really overwhelming environment. Because the reality is that the food at Whole Foods, for example, is exactly the same as food you get everywhere else. I'm really sorry to say that to you. But the reason it looks better and it tastes better is not because there's anything inherently better about most of the food, because most of it really is the exact same stuff. It's that it's treated better. And why is it treated better? It's because we're doing a different standard of work. We're doing work that should be paid more, that is creating value for the company by saying, this avocado, because I didn't throw the box on the ground, because I didn't mix it with conventional when it's organic, because of that, it's now worth $4. It's not worth $4, but instead of the 50 cents you will pay somewhere else. And so on this basis, we try and get people after meeting them outside, so they know we're there, they see us flyering all the time, and then we'll have an action. And at first, the concept of minority action seemed very scary because it seemed to open us up to a lot of retaliation. But we went along with it and we said, okay, we'll give it a try. And instead of being retaliated against, we actually had workers come to me like, I saw you on the news. Can I get in on that? Because, what you were doing, you looked like, they say, oh, you look like you're having fun or something like this. But what they really meant was you looked like you were empowered. Right, you actually, every day I come into this company and it makes me want to blow my brains out, or it makes me just want to walk off the job and throw the keys in or whatever. And once you are standing up and saying no, the company has to listen to us because we're going to stand out here and we're going to picket until you listen to us. And so this culminated over the course of the year. We won wage increases on an individual basis. We have yet to win one on a collective basis, but for example, I got a $2 raise over the course of the year, which is a huge amount for someone making as little as we make. And we also got them to step back on a really horrible attendance policy that got a lot of good workers fired. And we actually won the right to have Thanksgiving off, which was a huge victory for some, like the grocery business, it sort of just assumed that you will work holidays. And what the Thanksgiving victory, we call it Strikesgiving, in particular taught us a few things, because one really big concern, we thought people were going to get very angry at us that we were getting between them and their turkeys on this thing that was, it was a legitimate fear because people are very touchy about Thanksgiving, especially at Whole Foods. But we found that when we actually, what we did was we took something that was so widely accepted. People were like, well, of course you have to work Thanksgiving. You just have to assume that. You can't ask for it all. If it's a blackout day, whatever, you're going to have to work. And we said, well, why? Why should we have to work? There's no actual reason for this. And people, 20 years ago, it didn't happen, right? I don't know exactly how long ago it was that stores began to open, but it wasn't very long ago. And by challenging this really widely held idea that people had never questioned, we were actually able to speak to something that the entire population at large was feeling, right? So it wasn't just about Whole Foods anymore, it was about the whole phenomenon of holidays being taken away, either by being told the only way you can experience holidays through retail shopping, or by being forced to work with, when other people, everything about Thanksgiving we are told is like, oh, you should be with your family, it's time for family, and because people are so spread apart, it's often the only time people do get to see their family all year. And we said, why don't retail workers, why don't our families matter? This is just another manifestation of when you say our families don't matter, so we're not going to pay you enough to feed your kids. This is just another manifestation of that. But it taps into a really widespread anger over this phenomenon of holidays being taken away, and we actually had massive support, and we're hoping to plan a bigger strike to involve more stores, not just Whole Foods, but also other retail stores that open on Thanksgiving night next year, to say that, we're not just standing up for ourselves and saying we deserve a paid holiday, we're also standing up to say that there are some days that we just shouldn't work, and not for any moral or ideological reason, but just to be like, because the ideological tenets of Thanksgiving are pretty widely held to be extremely problematic, to say the least. But to say it's just because, me working on Thanksgiving does nothing to undo the, centuries of injustice and genocide done against Native Americans. And so I'm certainly not begging to go to work, just because I don't like the tenets of the holiday. But I think this is, again, something we can bring back into the academy in terms of taking ideas that, when you think about them for a second, seem very strange, and like the idea that private university students are somehow not employees when they're graduate employees, right? Like this, if you think about it for a few seconds, it seems absolutely ridiculous, because we grade papers, we do research, we do all sorts of things. So when you actually start to question that, you can tap into a much wider sentiment and use that to make a much more radical challenge to the way the university is actually being structured. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I'm sorry, I can talk for a long time.
We have sorry. I think you have 15 more minutes.
Oh, okay. So I will just wrap up sort of on this, in that, like I said, we've seen the minimum wage demands go from being a marginal thing to a really mainstream idea within a very, very short period of time. And this is not something that is endemic to the question of low wages, because people are particularly oppressed or it's particularly bad. It happened because we were able to build a movement among workers and connect that to questions about community struggle. And so, for example, like we talked about, I talked about the holiday issue, but another thing we did here in Chicago is we linked up with the Chicago Teachers Union, and we said it's not an accident that the same neighborhoods where all the schools are being closed are the neighborhoods where low-wage workers live. It's not an accident that the neighborhoods with the highest rate of violence and shootings are the same neighborhoods where low-wage workers live. These are endemic issues of apartheid in the schools and poverty spread throughout the city. And so I think this is a model that is transferable to everyone, and bringing it from the margin to the mainstream is possible, whether it's in the low-wage labor section or in academia.
So I'm Laura. I'm here from the University of Virginia. I'm a graduate student in the English department and a member of the Living Wage Campaign. And so the main point of my presentation is just going to be that I think that structural change is radical change, and I'm going to try to talk about what that looks like in terms of organizing around low-wage workers at the university, but also how that can be transferable outside of universities. And so I'm going to talk about three things. The first is low-wage workers at the University of Virginia. The second thing I'm going to talk about is the attempted ouster of President Teresa Sullivan in 2012. And the last thing I'll talk about is the cuts to UVA's preeminent financial aid program, Access UVA, in 2013. So the first part is about the Living Wage Campaign. And so the main point of this section is just that the structures of inequality that were present at the founding of the University of Virginia are very much a part of its present. UVA was built by slaves, for those of you who don't know. And that means that oppressive hierarchies based upon race are a part of its origins, and they remain in place today. So I'm sure a lot of you guys know this, but just in case, the first thing is, what is a living wage? And so a living wage is the amount of money that someone needs to make in order to live and work in the same community that he or she is residing in, without having to rely on public assistance. And it uses locally sourced data. So a living wage is different depending upon where you live. And so in Charlottesville, which is where the University of Virginia is located, a living wage is currently $13 an hour plus benefits, and that's calculated by the Economic Policy Institute. This is actually the number from 2012, so it's actually probably significantly higher at this point. And so the city of Charlottesville is really expensive. Cost of living are 10% higher than the national average, and despite the fact that we have extremely low unemployment rates, actually only about 5% of the population is unemployed, over a quarter of Charlottesville residents live below the poverty line. So that tells us that we have a lot of people who are underemployed and people who are not being paid enough for the work that they are doing. So at the University of Virginia, who is not being paid a living wage? And so we know from a lot of the research that we've done that the people who aren't being paid a living wage are thousands of direct employees, and we estimate hundreds of contract employees, and I'll talk about that estimated number in a moment. So direct employees at the University of Virginia make $11.30 an hour, and they receive benefits. So it's better than the minimum wage, the national minimum wage, but certainly still not a living wage. As Trish pointed out, $2 is a lot of money when you're not being paid very much money. And then the second group we have are contract employees who can make as little as $7.25 an hour, and as far as we know, they receive no benefits. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the difference between contract and direct employees. So the reason that this is estimated is because the University of Virginia, and probably the universities that all of you study and work at, have two different kinds of workers. Direct employees are people who are hired directly by the university, and so they get whatever benefits package the university offers. But there's a second class of workers, contract employees, who work on your campuses. However, they're technically employed by places like Aramark and Sodexo. And so what that means is that whatever the university offers its direct employees, it does not need to offer these contract employees, even though they might be working side by side with direct employees every day. And in fact, at the University of Virginia, we know from talking to workers that a lot of people work directly for the university for 8 hours, and then they're contracted out for 8 hours more and are being paid almost $4 less to do the exact same job, and they still can't make ends meet. The reason that this number is estimated is because the University of Virginia refuses to audit its contractors. So we have a line in all of our contracts that says that the University of Virginia is actually required to audit its contractors every year to find out about wage and benefit information, but because there's no enforcement mechanism, they don't do it, and they refuse to do so. So every time we ask, they say no. So there was recently this stuff, for those of you who saw between Tenured Radical and Rebecca Schumann about adjunct employees and graduate students and academic interviewing, where she talked a lot, both of them were talking about how adjuncts are invisible. So I would just like to add to that at the University of Virginia, contract employees are literally invisible. The University of Virginia refuses to acknowledge them on the campus. So the living wage campaign, its demand is that we want a living wage paid for all direct employees, but we also want wage standards to be put in place such that contractors have to also pay a living wage. They have to meet the University of Virginia standard, both in terms of wages and benefits. So the living wage campaign, it's a very long history, and I've got a timeline up here, but I'll just go through the slides and you guys can read them. And so the point of this timeline is just to say that wages and racial justice are closely linked at the University of Virginia. And the first call for higher wages came in 1969, which was just after UVA was desegregated, extremely late in the history of desegregation, when we had thousands of people come together and demand better working conditions and wages for the lowest paid employees at UVA, who then were largely people of color, especially women of color, and continue to be largely women of color. So it's a long history from 1969 to now, but the point of these slides is just to show that over the past 10 years, almost every single increase in wages that workers have gotten is through direct action on the part of students and faculty members and workers who are demanding better wages. So there was the $8 campaign Early on in the 2000s, more faculty and students demanded more. They won a wage increase. There was a sit-in in 2006 where 17 students and one faculty member were arrested. They were told that it was impossible to raise worker wages. Over the summer, the university quietly raised wages. And then the biggest, most recent large action was a hunger strike in 2012, where 12 students announced that they were not going to eat. The hunger strike went on for 13 days. It ultimately included 26 strikers, hundreds of solidarity pastors. It got huge national media attention in The Nation, the Melissa Harris Perry show, Sports Illustrated, because one of the strikers was a football player, so there was a big Sports Illustrated spread about it. The university said it was impossible to raise wages, and then in August, they raised wages. So we went from $10.65 for direct employees to $11.30 an hour. So we learn a couple things, I think, from the history of the living wage campaign. Before I talk about these lessons, the year after the hunger strike, through the Freedom of Information Act, we got a bunch of emails that high-level administrators were sending to each other during the hunger strike. From that, we found out that it would cost, according to their own estimates, $1 million to pay every single worker at the University of Virginia a living wage. That's 0.1% of the annual operating budget at the University of Virginia. And to put that number in perspective, in the story I'll talk about next, the COO, Michael Strine, was fired after the Sullivan scandal. They paid him $850,000 to get out of town. So one man's severance package could have almost covered an entire living wage. And so the other thing we found out from the FOIA documents is that the University of Virginia this spring, when they renegotiate contracts, is going to try to strike the clause that says that they are required to audit contractors. So they want to formalize that invisibility. They've forgotten that clause was in the contract until we reminded them, and now they want to get rid of it so that when we demand that they find out about their contractors, they can say, like, oh, it's not in the contracts, we just can't do it. And so the lessons that we learned first is that the history of UVA is the present of UVA. So we see the same history of oppression of the same kinds of groups continuing from the origins with Thomas Jefferson up until now. The second thing that we learned is that student-led organizing can put up a fight with high-level administrations, and that it's won numerous incremental victories. And these are the fruits of direct action. So students, people who in many ways can feel really disempowered when they are talking to administrators, have quite a lot of power, and so do workers, people who are really intimidated at UVA. People get fired all the time for speaking out. But when they say, I want more, they actually can be successful in getting more. The third thing is that obviously money is not an issue. If you've got $850,000 lying around to blow on someone who's bad at his job, you can pay people money who are good at their jobs. And so they use money as an excuse, but we know that it's not really the issue. And the real issue that I think is that what we're demanding, when you demand that a university pay people who it has historically ignored more, you're actually demanding a kind of reorganization of the hierarchy upon which higher ed rests, and that's the radical change that we're asking for, and that's what they're resisting. They're not opposed to paying people more, they're opposed to treating people as equals, and that's why they keep fighting. Okay, so the second thing I'm going to talk about, a lot of people are probably familiar with this, and this is the ouster of President Teresa Sullivan in 2012. And so this story reiterates that structural change is the radical demand that we're making, and that at UVA, the structures that need to be changed are those of race and class. In this particular story, direct action was large in scale. It worked very quickly, although it's an incomplete story, and I'll talk about why. So my last story was about students, administrators, and workers, but this story is about alumni, faculty, and the Board of Visitors, which is UVA's version of Board of Trustees, because we can't call anything what it actually is. Oh yeah, sorry, okay, sorry. So a lot of you guys might have seen this and know what happened, but Helen Dragas, who is the head of the Board of Visitors, the director, went to the president and she said that she had the votes on the board to get rid of Teresa Sullivan. So then Sullivan resigned on June 10th, 2012. Through a bunch of leaked emails that the Washington Post got, we saw that Helen Dragas and the vice rector, Mark Hinton, were at the center of this attempted coup. And it's because they wanted a business-style corporate leadership to take place at UVA. So more MOOCs. They were really, really obsessed with MOOCs. They were sending out emails in the New York Times about MOOCs. And they also wanted to cut obscure departments like classics, French, Spanish, things that people apparently don't need anymore. And the Darden School, the business school at UVA, was really closely tied into all of these actions. We saw that high-level administrators at the Darden School knew that this was going to happen, and that they kept it under wraps, and that they sent a lot of really smarmy emails about how Darden was going to be taken care of. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. And the thing to note is that this was a decision-making process that never took faculty into account. Faculty were never asked about what was going on, like the fact that the University of Virginia is a leader in digital humanities and has been since the 90s. So they were really worried about MOOCs, but if they had just asked someone, they would have known that there's no reason to worry because UVA is already doing a lot of digital stuff. So we get these huge protests because of this. Faculty and departments took a major role in this. The Faculty Senate was able to pressure the man who they appointed as the interim president not to accept the job. They passed numerous resolutions saying that they had no confidence in the Board of Visitors and demanding the reinstatement of Sullivan and for Dragas to resign. Departments organized collectively, led by department chairs, to go to these enormous rallies. There were petitions sent out, face groups were made, the governor's office was hounded. And on June 26th, 16 days after Teresa Sullivan announced that she was resigned, she was reinstated by unanimous vote of the board. So this was good, but we had some problems. I also want to give a shout out to Dorothy Couchman, who's in this photo and is in the audience. So this is an incomplete video, victory rather, not video. So it's incomplete because Helen Dragas, though the demand had been that she step down, she did not step down. We also still don't have any faculty or staff representation on the Board of Visitors, despite the fact that that was a demand. And so what that tells us is a couple of things. So we learn some lessons that are similar to the last ones, but also some new things. One thing is that massive direct action, even when it's mobilized by faculty rather than students, can be very successful. Unfortunately, direct action is particularly successful when it's used to maintain the status quo. And so the rallies over the summer were called things like the Rally to Restore Honor. So direct action works really well when people feel like they're going back to a kind of previous time. We found out also that one of the ways that direct action can be really effective, and this is kind of like icky for radical politics, but it's true, is when people are working on the outside and the inside at the same time. So as the protest got started, there were people on the Board of Visitors who were saying things like, we really need to reinstate Teresa Sullivan, and then we saw that that actually had some help, that the governor also leaned a little bit on the board to say, like, something has to happen. So working on the outside and the inside can be a particularly effective strategy. And the last thing, of course, is that real structural change continues to be the sticking point. That the Board of Visitors still runs the University of Virginia. They're still appointed by the governor, largely through donations to the governor's political campaigns. And so we haven't seen structural change, and we still have the same kind of leadership structure in place. All right, the third thing I'm going to talk about is the cuts to access UVA. And so this story is going to reiterate, as with the living wage campaign, that a failure of budgetary priorities is often defended by a false claim of lack of means. And that the cuts to access UVA, which is a large-scale financial aid program at the University of Virginia, is an attempt, I think, to keep the University of Virginia as an overwhelmingly white and an overwhelmingly privileged institution. So the background to this is that on May 20th, 2019, Teresa Sullivan wrote an email to the entire university community announcing that the University of Virginia had reached a $3 billion fundraising goal. This brings the University of Virginia's total endowment to over $6 billion. So that's billion with a B, which makes the University of Virginia the wealthiest public institution in the United States. So we have a lot of money. The announcement actually came at the same time that a lot of local news outlets reported that the University of Virginia was increasingly undiverse in terms of race and class. In fact, so undiverse that we are as undiverse as we were just before segregation. So there's not a lot of people other than white students of privilege at the University of Virginia. So in her email announcement, Teresa Sullivan wrote after this fundraising goal was reached, quote, "Because of this success, the university's best days lie ahead," end quote. So these best days are not the best days for everyone. On August 3rd, so that's just 3 months after she made this announcement, the Board of Visitors, with Sullivan's vote and support, decided to gut the Access UVA program. So Access UVA was a merit-based scholarship that provided grant-based financial aid to students who qualified. So you had to have like high SAT and ACT scores, high grades. Your family income, combined family income, had to be less than $60,000 as your combined income. And it actually didn't provide aid to all that many students. So about 250 people currently on campus receive Access UVA grants. So these cuts mean that members of the program who used to graduate from UVA with $0 in debt will now graduate from UVA with no more than $28,000 in debt. So an enormous increase. The university has said that they hope to keep that number down to $14,000, but they've made no formal commitment to do so. And given the fact that we expect the tuition will continue to rise over the coming years, that that's become the status quo, this is something that is going to continue to create a real burden on families and students that increases every single year, and it sets a troubling precedent. So what we learn about this is that race and class still really matter at the University of Virginia, that the people who get Access UVA are largely students of color and largely, obviously, people whose parents don't make very much money. And again, that money clearly is not the issue. We have $6 billion, and this money could have been spent on students, but it wasn't. So I just want to close by drawing together some of these threads and then talking about making a modest proposal. So this is the Rotunda, our UNESCO World Heritage Site. And so the lesson, as I said, is that structural change is radical change. And what that means, I think, is that when organizing both inside the university and outside, we should think about people in terms of positions rather than individuals. So Teresa Sullivan, our president, is a labor sociologist who has published a book in which she wrote in print that a living wage is a necessary condition for self-actualization. Despite that, she has been opposed to a living wage at UVA, and has actually just continued all of the policies of her predecessor, who was openly opposed to paying a living wage at UVA, and she's in some ways been worse, that she's, these cuts to Access UVA. So I mention this only to say that the office of president seems to necessitate, whether or not we believe that this is real necessitation, but that it forces people to behave in certain ways that have very little to do with who they might be like as individuals. And so when building these campaigns, it's really helpful to think about those positions. So like the CEO of the bank might be like a nice guy, but he's always going to do what the CEO of the bank does. And so it's helpful to think about that when you're organizing. And then the last thing is that we should be demanding that our tenured faculty are at the vanguard of organizing, that tenured faculty used their tenure to help save Teresa Sullivan, and we need to start demanding that if they want to save themselves, they need to start to use that tenure to come out, to speak out, to support students. When students are told that they're going to be arrested or expelled for attending an open meeting, tenured faculty have to say, like, over my dead body, and I'm not going to let that happen here. And I also think that we need to see a lot of organizing between low-wage workers and adjuncts and grad students, because we're stronger together, but it's something that we have. So then on that note, my last thing is that my modest proposal is that I think that we should have some sort of a material show of solidarity that comes out of this sub-conference that is exportable to other campaigns, to other universities, and that people can do to show that they are in solidarity with one another. I don't know what that would look like, but it is a way to start to build a national movement that demands that universities be, the sort of centers of positive, radical change. Thank you.
Running on time, which is great, which means we have about 30 minutes of Q&A. So I'll just moderate from up here and take questions as they And definitely, when you ask your question, please just state your name, just so we have a reference point and we start to get to know each other also. So, questions? In the back, yeah.
Hi, I'm Simon. Thank you guys. That was, all three of those were great. I would love to hear more from Trish, the one in the middle of that.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more from Trish, especially about what organizing at a private university looks like when you don't have the established structure of the graduate student union, right? I mean, I'm coming at this from a pretty naive sort of position. I'm not really experienced in organizing, but I'm at a private university, and my experience is that there's that attempts to organize would be met with a lot of resistance, because there's this sense that the graduate students and the faculty are kind of not exactly friends, that they're supposed to get along and be really amicable, and any sort of organizational efforts would sort of infringe on that in a way that nobody would want to get involved with, right? So what has your experience with that been like at UChicago?
I would just like.
Oh, yeah.
So I actually, I would say the best person to talk to would actually be Andrew, who's sitting here in the front. Fortunately or unfortunately, my involvement in Fight for 15 at my job outside the university has taken a lot of my energy away from being involved with grad student unionization. I think one thing, though, that I think is really clear from what happened to NYU is that the potential to organize outside of the sort of legally defined bounds exists, and anything that we do going forward has to be done on the basis of that you can build solidarity between students, undergraduates, grad employees, and faculty. And we have to figure out, based on the structure of our own universities, because I know, for example, UChicago is extremely decentralized, and it makes it even harder than it might be at some other places. We've managed to build very lasting organizations, and we need to figure out exactly how that will look on each different campus, but I'm probably not the best person to talk to.
And Andrew will probably talk about that a little bit too on our financial research panel, because we'll be thinking about researching finance of private universities, so we can probably address some of that there too.
Right. Yes.
Next question.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. My name's Kirk. I teach as an adjunct here at Columbia College Chicago. I guess it was 23, 24 years ago. I was paid $8 an hour as a graduate student working in the Fine Arts Library at the University of Virginia. I had full support. I graduated without paying. I think maybe I paid $1,000 in tuition. So I was one of the really in a privileged position. I still have my blue blazer. It's common at UVA to wear blue blazers, especially to football games for some reason. But my concern is what you said about President Sullivan and the disconnect that's apparent between her academic work and her decision making in a leadership role. And what are the it's really an open question. What do you feel the implications are for the university or for higher ed in general, especially with her position as one of the most powerful presidents? And then, just leave it at that. Lots of things we can talk about.
Yeah, so there's a lot to say about that. I mean, I think, again, that reiterates that point that we should be thinking in terms of structure, that we shouldn't pin our hope. I mean, it's fine to kind of pin your hopes on, like, oh, we're getting this great person in, but that it's worth expecting that great person will just do exactly what people before have done, because that's what we expect. But we've started a strategy where actually we're trying to get Teresa Sullivan to meet with workers to talk about what it's like to work a low-wage job at the University of Virginia day in and day out, and to have those meetings documented such that Teresa Sullivan knows that other people know that these meetings are happening, so that when she then says, sorry, we just can't pay workers more, she looks really bad for doing so, and that's something that nobody can really weasel their ways out of this. The board looks bad if they do that, especially in this economic climate, if you say, like, I don't care about low-wage workers publicly, either through your actions or because you were forced to say it. People have said that to us in numerous private meetings, but nobody's ever come out and publicly said the University of Virginia doesn't care about low-wage workers. And so when you sort of force someone's hand that that's something to do. But I think that there's been a lot of concern about out-of-control boards. This happened in Texas. And people have come out to support their presidents or to support those structures. I just think that now is the time to push that further and to say, we saved your skin, Teresa Sullivan. You have a job to do, and you're not doing it. And we are demanding more. So I think that I'm kind of a fan of direct action, but I think that the answer is to just keep pushing, and that the implication is to say, we've seen that we have power, but we're not going to let you weasel your way out of this, and we're not going to let you continue to maintain the status quo, to say that we demand the full implications of this change, that you saw that there was power in the people, and now you need to defend those people, you need to support them, and you need to put your skin on the line, stand up and say, we're going to pay graduate students more, we're going to pay all the workers at UVA more, we're not going to allow tenure track lines to turn into adjunct lines. We were vulnerable for you, it's your turn to be vulnerable for us.
Well, then how do you think she would respond to that?
So, as an individual, I'm not going to speculate publicly about how I think Teresa Sullivan will respond. I think that this is about just creating a climate in which she can do nothing but respond by saying okay. Because I think that as an individual, universities are complicated places. She has all sorts of things to be concerned about. But I think that what we need to do as a campaign, but also as the university as a whole, is to create a climate in which the outcome that we're demanding is the only option, that she can't but say, okay, yes, I will put myself on the line for these things.
My question for Laura, wondering if you could elaborate on the hunger strike, and particularly what was necessary, in terms of infrastructure or prep, build up in order to be able to do that, and be able to do that in a way that had enough attention to be successful?
Okay, so the hunger strike was really intense, and there was a year build up, so if anyone is considering a radical action, like a hunger strike at your campus, my first piece of advice would be not to do it, because it's really intense. But the second thing is, we consensed on that, so the Living Wage campaign runs on an anarchist consensus model. So we consensed on the hunger strike at our second meeting in the fall, and decided we were going to move forward. So we built up a series of increasingly escalating actions to get attention. We did a ton of research to find out what it would cost the university, in our estimates, to pay a living wage, to find out a lot about the power structures at the University of Virginia. We got a lot of training. We reached out to a lot of different activist organizations. We did fundraising because it's expensive to, make materials, but to host rallies. We built relationships with the local press, who mostly don't like us, but nonetheless would come out and cover our actions so that we could see them. We got commitments from people who said they were going to do it and do the hunger strike. So there were a lot of, if you're going to do something big and radical, it takes, you've just got to put all of your time in to doing it. It takes a really, really, really long time. And we kept threatening, you better pay a living wage or else. And we didn't want them to know what the or else was, but we delivered on that or else in small ways. So, you protested a BOV meeting, and we say, we've got this demand. You have until the next meeting to respond. When they don't, then you go into the meeting and you refuse to leave until they respond to your demand. So you keep doing more things until finally we did it. So I actually think if the hunger strike had lasted a little longer, it would have been successful. That what we saw from the documents when we got those emails, they had no idea what to do. They were terrified of the media fallout. I think if we had, it's hard to say to 26 people, just don't eat. Keep on going. But I do think that if we had been able to hold on a little bit longer, we would have been successful. I also think that universities are really unprepared, at least in the United States, for this kind of radical student action. And so we felt that we had no balls in our court, but we had all the balls in our court. We could have demanded anything. So they didn't meet with us until the 8th day of the strike. We should have, we could have gone crazy with that, but we felt we don't know what to do. If we had just blown that shit up, they would have been in hot water. They told us we couldn't have certain people in meetings with administrators. We should have just been we can have anyone we want or we won't meet with you, because they were so terrified. So I think that universities, it looks bad to arrest students, it looks bad to have them declared mentally incompetent, which is what they would have had to do in order to get people to eat. And so I just think that like once you've committed to a radical action, you should just like push really hard because they're not going to know what to do about you guys.
You said that you all got the Board of Visitor emails through a story in the Washington Post?
Oh, no, the Washington Post got, well, so some of our emails we got, the Washington Post found all these leaked emails during the Sullivan scandal, but then using the Freedom of Information Act, we demanded emails during the hunger strike, which if anyone tries to do this, the Freedom of Information Act is great, but it's not going to be as great in the future just because now university administrators expect it, so they're doing more business over the phone. The other thing is that they said that they couldn't release Teresa Sullivan's emails because she has presidential privilege. And that's probably illegal, but they also know that we don't have the resources to fight them in a drawn-out legal case about that.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a graduate student at Cornell, but actually at Michigan for my undergrad. I think my first year corresponded with Teresa Sullivan's last year there. So I have one question for Laura and then a question for everyone on the panel. My question for Laura was, you know, you brought up structural change and changing the whole structure multiple times. And, you know, the sense I have is just that the power that maybe used to be, and perhaps this is incorrect, correct me if I'm wrong, the power that used to be vested in a large faculty legislative body is now vested in an executive. And so it was really surprising to me when you said organizing work even if initiated by tenured faculty. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more. And so like the power that the faculty actually has as opposed to the one executive and thinking about kind of that tension there as well as reinvesting the power in the faculty. And then my question to the whole panel, one thing that seems to connect all these different scenarios that you're talking about is a kind of problem in the end of monitoring the people who you're kind of demanding things from and then holding them accountable to give you those things. So I wonder if maybe you had any tangible suggestions for us about how, when we're organizing, we can put structures in place to both monitor and hold people accountable from whom we're demanding these changes. Because it sounds like that's a really challenging thing, and I think something like a partisan political campaign is, you know, ground zero for where that kind of goes awry. Thanks.
Yeah, so in terms of faculty, all I will say is that after Sullivan was ousted, a lot of faculty said, like, well, now we need students to organize. It just needs to be like a student-led movement, which I mean, it's a position that I don't understand, and I didn't understand it then. Like, why, when you just saw that you guys were really powerful, are you saying like, oh no more, we don't have any more power? So I think that it's more just to say that, I mean, we're living through a political moment when in general there's like, you know, whatever, lots of political apathy, whether it's more than there has been in the past or less, I don't know. And that I think has allowed us to lose a lot of the gains that we, gained, that labor gained a lot of gains after the Cold War and during the Cold War, and they're gone now. And students had gained a lot during the Cold War and afterwards, and those are all gone. And so I think that it's about like repoliticizing the faculty. And so to say like you have power, and so you might think that your position in some way means that I think a lot of faculty, not as someone who's not a faculty member, I don't know if it's the case, but there's many in the audience who I know have been really active. I know Carissa Mitchell has done a lot of really great stuff at OSU. But I think sometimes people feel like it compromises their role as an educator, that somehow they're like not objective, or students will walk into their class and like know what to expect. And so they can't be really vocal about that. But, like Susan Freeman in the English department at UVA has kept the living wage campaign alive for 15 years. We would have died multiple times without her. And she is a highly celebrated academic who does great work. And I don't think that I've never heard a student say, like, well, I would take her class, but I hear that she is a radical and not take it. So I just think it's about repoliticizing faculty and saying, like, come with us. When adjuncts radicalize, when students radicalize, when workers radicalize, like, come with us and do it too.
Yeah, so I think in terms of, like, the question of monitoring and holding accountable, especially for Fight for 15, I think it extends quite a bit beyond that. Because what we're actually, what we're asking for in sort of a roundabout way through the way the thing has been run, is we want a union contract, right? We want something that is legally enforceable that says, we can do these things. One thing that I think has been really important, though, and it was shown here in the city last week with these negative 60-degree temperatures, is that the teachers union fought something outside of the contract, right? And they actually said, we should not have to go to work. It's dangerous for us to go to work. It's dangerous for our students to come to school. If you're not going to stand up and do what's right for the students, we're going to force you to do it. And they actually won 2 days of school closed when the mayor was off in Indonesia doing something. And so I think it actually shows that having a union contract is important. If we're going to have political candidates, we need to have candidates that come from the movement, whether it's Ty Moore in Minneapolis or Kshama Sawant in Seattle. They're both coming from a specific set of politics, but they are also people that actually are taking as their platform the demands of the movements that are around them, whether it's fighting for 15, stopping evictions, whatever it is. And then in terms of how do we actually get to the point where people are willing to participate in this kind of organizing? Because even though what we have is not very much, losing it also means a lot because you don't have very much to begin with. But I think we're at quite after this period of since really the mid to late 70s and 80s certainly, when all of the gains of labor and student activism have really been rolled back and living standards are lower now than they were before. We're at the point now where there's very little choice. It's participation in the continuing neoliberalization of the university or the continuing driving down of wages in the service sector. If you participate in that, whether you're a tenured faculty, a graduate employee, or a low-wage worker, you're essentially paving the road for the tank that is going to crush you. And there's really, at this point, there's very little besides these 2 options because things have gone so far in one direction.
I think when it comes to the question of monitoring, it seems that there's always going to be an issue, right? As long as there's white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism, we know that exploitation is going to manifest in different crises all of the time. And so in any one victory, whether it's low-wage fight at a university, at a Whole Foods or the corporation, or a bank fight, we can monitor them on mortgages, and mortgages will be fair and wonderful, but then, Whole Foods employees will be harassed on a daily basis. So, wholesale monitoring, one sounds a little bit scary, and also impractical. So, what does that mean in the meantime? I think what it looks like in the day-to-day organizing and who our targets are is not going just for Chase Bank. It's also going to the Department of Justice and calling out the revolving door between our U.S. Attorney General and the law offices that represent Goldman Sachs. I think it's choosing to draw the parallels between corruption that is, within the state and corporations, and attacking them both in conjunction and forcing them to attack each other, because divide and conquer works so well for us, but it works well as the monitoring mechanism for them, right? So, yeah, I guess that's, and then as far as accountability, again, in a organizing way, so when it comes to these fights, holding them accountable means not declaring victory before it happens. Right? Because we've done that a couple times to our own deficit. But you obviously need to celebrate, right? We have to celebrate the steps that we get towards victory. But Colin, we're counting the chickens before they hatch, right? Isn't it so hot? So that's something that we have to get good at, and just sticking those fights through and believing that you will actually win instead of calling victory early, just so they can have something to hold on to.
The other thing I would say is collecting stories can be a great way to monitor people in power. So we've collected a lot of worker testimonials at the University of Virginia. You can find them on our website. It's a really good, it empowers people to feel like what happened to me is something that I can talk about. and that people will respond to, that I can hear it read out at a rally, even if I wasn't able to disclose my name because I'm afraid of retaliation. But it's also a way for people to start to say, like, I think it's really fucked up that when there's a huge snowstorm and the University of Virginia closes, you're given 20 minutes notice and told that you cannot leave your job. It's not like go home, come back. You cannot leave. You have to stay there through the night, and all of the people you know are also working low-wage jobs, so they're not off of work, and you've got 2 kids sitting at home, and your boss just says, like, figure it out. So having that be something that people know about is a great way to put that power in those people to say, like, you can tell your story, and we'll help you to provide a venue to tell it, but it's your story and it matters.
Colleen?
I just had a question for the panelists. How do you find that your unionizing or the living wage campaign, or if it does affect or influence your research practices, and how you find it, colors your dealings with other graduate students, colleagues, and where you find the time? Does one get more time than the other? How do you balance, or do you find that that's not a problem at all?
Sure. So this is something we've been struggling with, especially graduate employees and students who have to work jobs outside the university, because by the University of Chicago, by contract, we're not actually allowed to work outside more than 19 and a half hours, but it's sort of implicitly understood that if you're not getting funding, that's what you're doing, is that you're breaking this contract and actually working more hours. And so within the department itself, I think there's been a lot of support in terms of, understanding that the system is not working and that you have to sort of make do where you can. But I think it's also like the students who are in this situation, I think there's a lot of shame around it, right? Like, people don't want to talk about their funding situation. They don't want to talk about how much work they have to do. And then when I finally got another student who sort of opened up, she was like, yeah, I feel like I'm drowning. I feel like I can't keep up. I can't do the work I need to do. And so our research suffers, right? Because we can't just pick up and go to an archive, right? We can't go and do our research. We don't have any money to do that. And so I think we have to see, obviously it's incredibly difficult. It influences our research in that negative way. And we have to actually be able to say that this is something we can organize around, right? Because you're saying at the same time that we want to have the highest standards of research at this university, that you're not actually giving us the means to do that, but the means exist. Because the University of Chicago also has a $6 billion endowment. The money is there. And it's just not prioritized to make sure that, I'm blanking on the name of the blog where I read this, but it was conditionally accepted. And I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with that. But imagine if graduate programs were actually framed around having people live not just full, meaningful academic lives, but making sure they were fully supported in terms of mental and emotional health and physical health. In terms of the actual research I do, I'm a labor historian because of my experience as a labor organizer, and because of the experience I had working low-wage jobs and working on farms and all this sort of thing. And it certainly influences my research in the sense that it teaches me a lot about where to go to look. And I think in that sense, it's actually, people sort of say, oh, well, maybe you're biased or these things. But if I hadn't participated in strikes, I would never think, these are the people I should go talk to. These are the places I should go look, because all I would think to do is to do what people had already done before. But by participating in these actions and actually understanding how a strike works, how does an actual union organization meeting work, it actually gives a lot more insight into the process of how you can tell stories really from the bottom up, how you can look at the most marginalized people and tell things in a way that tells us something new about organizing and what workers have done to better their own conditions.
So in terms of balance, I would agree. I think that sometimes it sucks. I haven't done things academically that I've wanted to do because I just said I won't have time. So I have to make this choice that if I'm going to do this kind of organizing that is very time consuming, I can't take this research opportunity, or I want to teach this class, but it's going to take too much of my time, and so I just can't do it. I'll teach this other class that maybe is less interesting, but it's what I have time for. I do think that in terms, my dissertation's about nationalism in the 20th century U.S. and refigurations of the conquest of the Americas. So I deal with some labor issues, but it's not primarily about labor. But I do think, I think that I've never been as intellectually challenged as when I'm organizing. I mean, like when you there's nothing like hitting a brick wall when you're organizing and you just think, like, I can't see anything around this wall. And you're forced, first of all, to break with these dictates in academia about the individual, like sage, and actually say to, like the person who serves you food, like, what are we going to do now? And to like really start to get resources from people, to ask them what they think, to get help, but to think outside the box and to say, like, at the end of the hunger strike, we were like, what next? I mean, how could that fail? Like, what do we do now? And the fact that we've been able to say, like, there is more that we can do, that's not the end of the story, has been really intellectually helpful for me, and something that I think I bring to my dissertation. And the other thing is that I'm very aware of what we look like from the outside, and I think that from the inside we look really different. And so I've thought about that a lot in my intellectual work. Like, it looks this way, but what's it like on the inside? Is it really like that on the inside? And that's been really intellectually productive. As far as my colleagues, I'm lucky that my dissertation committee has been like overwhelmingly supportive of what I've been doing, which I know that's a luxury that not everyone has. I don't know what my colleagues think of me. I think that they think I'm like a little bit crazy. I don't know. I think it's fine. I mean, I have a good support network. Is that true? Do people think I'm crazy? Okay. No, they don't. But I have a good support network. I think that, and I think that people, that it's important to say, like, I'm gonna work really hard and like win this award or win this fellowship and still be doing this kind of organizing, because like I refuse to say that it's one or the other, or that, like I just try to be really upfront. So I just, like, the people who think I'm crazy, I imagine that like someday when like they don't get a job or something, they'll be like, man, maybe I should have thought about this more at the time. But like you can't, not everyone's gonna like you.
Kat, I know you're not interested, but I would be interested to hear your thoughts on how working with Occupy and Citizens Alternative in Minneapolis has started to shape, right? Like, you're thinking about your own future. Like, I don't know how involved you were in undergrad, but it would be interesting to get that perspective too on how your work with them might have impacted your undergraduate studies and clearing that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can get that from you as well.
Yeah. I don't know. I organized in my undergraduate and was almost expelled for it. Similar experiences there. But I think that I had like a really unique undergraduate experience because I got to take classes that allowed me to organize and allowed to study movement work. And since doing Occupy Homes, I was thinking about like the future and like balancing time between like being a paid organizer is very distinct in that you get to like really perfect and like study and constantly work on self-improvement and like strategy improvement within the movement, while actually organizing on the ground campaigns, and being the kind of organizer that wants to focus, like see my improvement and the improvement of the strategies of radical movements around me, is like a privilege and like an important way to look at the work, I think. So I'm not totally sure how the question fits into my life, but balancing my own understanding of movement and resistance building has like a direct impact on the ability of Occupy Homes and other housing justice organizations to hold Wall Street accountable and to radicalize more people in our community. There's that.
So we are we're going to take one more question, and then we'll break for lunch, which will be until 1:45, so we've got plenty more time to do more of this fabulous. I'll
try to keep it real quick. Yeah. My name is Sam with the Chicago Anti-Eviction Campaign and Graduate Students United in Chicago. And I just was real quickly really interested in the framework of the panel, right? Because it's, I think there's something particularly about highlighting the question of vulnerability and trying to organize folks who are in vulnerable situations, whether those are homeowners or tenants who are facing eviction, or those are low-wage workers. And I was curious, I
I've kind of been able to see it from different perspectives on campus and sort of in the community. And it's really hard to organize graduate students around some of those vulnerabilities, despite the fact that they're dealing with very tangible circumstances that, I think it's always difficult to do that sort of organizing. But I was curious in terms of if you found kind of ways, strategies of engaging those kind of precarious situations that folks that you've worked with are in, and if there's any particular lessons that you've drawn out in general, and some that also might be useful for those of us who are looking to organize on campus, particularly around people's adjunct teaching situations, and the sort of graduate student lack of support and things of that nature.
I'll answer this. So the first home I ever occupied, like back when Occupy Wall Street was going down and Occupy Homes hadn't formed yet, was the home of an adjunct professor at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. And that was really freaking powerful. Like, here's a woman, powerful woman, adjunct professor, has like 5 PhDs, like ridiculous, kind of like she had like 5 of them, like stacked up. And she's a single mom and immigrant from Hungary. She had free socialist college education. I guess that's how she got all those PhDs. So, like here she was, literally people being dragged from her home by the NPD. What? Like, this is the toll. This is the cost. So like we had to directly like bring U of M, the university experience, into the vulnerable situation of its own members, right? And on the other hand, like we have an organization that we're partnered with called Kick Wall Street Off Campus at McAllister College, and they are trying to get Wells Fargo kicked off their campus, and we also organize against Wells Fargo, so it's so serendipitous. And their whole platform is based on housing justice, because they formed as a sister organization to us for college students. So here are these like young, very privileged, mostly white students who are fighting for like our communities, like in communities of color. And actually, what I have seen over the last couple of years is the more vulnerable. Like, so we started organizing people experiencing homelessness, right? So the folks who've gotten involved in that part of our work have primarily been like young Black men. And there has been a stronger partnership between our vacants work and just college students than I saw with homeowners and college students. Even though you might say that there's less like experience, like shared experience with like literacy and whatever, but like the like heartstrings, I think, and like the students like seeing their peers experience homelessness and not have the same opportunity for education, have been incarcerated already, things like that, like build this really powerful unity. And yeah, and like seeing like those same college students share our partnerships with SEIU and with Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, a people color-led organization. Like, so there's been a lot of crossover and like risk-taking, I think, for all of us to work with each other, like folks with more privilege and folks, who are experiencing more oppression at a given moment. And anyway, so that's how I've experienced vulnerability being like sought or stood for, I guess, university students.
Yeah, I think, so I think at Whole Foods in particular, I mean, Whole Foods is in some ways, they're like, if you were going to say this, like the graduate students of the low-wage industry, in the sense that people were kind of like, I make $3 an hour, it could be worse. Like, I could work at Walmart. And, because, like, our working conditions are bad, but theirs are a lot worse. And so what we ended up doing was we found, in our mind, we're like, we want a union, we want living wages, whatever, but we came to people around the issue of attendance policy because it was the most immediate thing that was like, I might get fired tomorrow. And like, we were able to find, it was something almost everyone agreed on, that was a bad thing. We're like, okay, well, we can organize on this basis. And from there, when people participate, like at first they're kind of like, yeah, I don't think we should demand any more money, they already pay us pretty good. Or we get gain sharing, which is actually money that they steal from us and then give back to us. And so, but over the course of actually doing that organizing, people's consciousness has completely shifted, and now they're like, I want $20 an hour, I don't want $15 an hour. And I think there's also the question, I mean, in the university in particular, we are confronting an incredibly strong ideological apparatus in the sense of individualizing our problems, segregating us by department, and maintaining the fault lines of oppression that already exist in our society in an incredibly pronounced way. But an organizer friend of mine in Hyde Park, who's a teacher, actually came up, they're having similar sort of mechanisms driven into their schools through like teacher evaluation and like individualizing teacher evaluations. And a really interesting strategy, because people are like, we're not going to pass, we're all going to lose our jobs. So it's, you know, a similar sort of fear around the issue of getting tenure or being able to keep an adjunct contract. And what they actually did was they decided to work collaboratively by department to make sure that everyone passed the evaluations. So rather than trying to foster an atmosphere of competition, they said, you know, we're all good teachers. We all deserve to be here and have our jobs secure. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to establish a committee to help people learn how to do the evaluations, the skills they need to be able to pass them, and really foster a sense of community in a place that was trying to divide the teachers and send them apart. And I think this is sort of a model, I mean, we bring this into our organizing in Fight for 15. I certainly think we need to bring that to the academy, because what they're saying is that we don't all deserve to be here, our research is not all important. And we know that's not true, right? People are committed to their life, their work, and their research. We need to figure out how is the collective unit that values scholarship in general to be able to foster that among all of our colleagues.
Yeah, I think those are great. I don't know anything to add to everybody else's.
Just real quickly on that last point, I thought that was really important tactic in terms of response. At a conference last year, Cedric Robinson, who spoke Black Marxism, pointed out that when he was in graduate school, you know, you're like, it's not designed for everybody to be able, as a graduate student, to be able to handle all the responsibilities that you're given. Like, it's kind of like not possible in many different instances. You're either going to have to bullshit your way through like explanations of I read this book and this book and this book, or people have to work together. And he talked about how when he was in graduate school, you know, and there was like a very small cohort of Black students at UC Berkeley, they had study groups, and they met on a regular basis, and, you know, they would share notes of, you know, this book and so on and so forth, but it was a collaborative process that made it possible for them to finish in the first place, but also made it possible for them to also do this for the board at the same time as well.
Well, let's give a round of applause for our out there, and also if you weren't here this morning, please remember that we have an open bar tonight that was partially donated by Revolution Brews. We have a ton of beer, so feel free to publicize that for your social media channels. We have plenty for all, but yeah.
So I also want to make just a very quick announcement. I forgot to say something, but right now I'm actually heading there now. But so Sandwich Shop here in downtown Chicago fired all of their workers 3 days before Christmas, then said that later, after massive public backlash against it, they'd give them a week's pay, but in reality they only gave them each a day's pay. And so right now I'm actually going over there. We're going to have a sit-in at the Snarf Sandwich location. So you're either welcome to come over there, or just to, you can go on the website, get the number, and call the corporate office, and just tell them that you demand that these workers be reinstated with full back pay.
Can you repeat the
Oh, yes, SNARF. SNARFF. The ridiculous name for a sandwich shop.
where is that?
It's at the Prudential Plaza, which is 120 North Stetson. But yeah, and so really, if we can just continue to put public pressure on the company to give the workers their jobs back. It's the first major instance of retaliation we've had against Fight for 15 workers in Chicago. And if there's a SNARF sandwich at any of your universities, we encourage you to boycott.
How long is this in for?
Until they make us leave.
Here are the numbers behind you.
Yes. But yeah, so the Colorado office, that is the main office. So if you can phone them there, or you can call the 180 North Stetson. But yeah, they've been refusing to talk with workers. And like I said, they fired them 3 days before Christmas for supposed remodeling that has yet to occur.
Would you prefer to be called Colorado office or Chicago office?